The courtroom was almost silent when Eleanor Hayes walked through the doors. She held a thin brown folder against her chest. Her hands were shaking, not because she was afraid of the judge. She was afraid of the two people sitting across the room. Her daughter and her son -in-law. Claire saw her first. For a moment, their eyes met. Then Claire laughed. It was a small laugh. Cold. Almost careless. Daniel, her husband, did not laugh. He looked down at the table. That was strange, very strange. Eleanor stopped for half a second. She had spent 68 years learning how to read people, and Daniel was hiding something. She slowly walked toward her seat. Claire leaned toward her lawyer and whispered something. The lawyer smiled. Eleanor sat down. She looked at her daughter again. Claire was wearing an expensive black dress, the same dress Eleanor had helped her buy 2 months earlier. Back then, Claire had hugged her and said, "Mom, I don't know what I would do without you." Now Claire would not even look at her. The judge entered. Everyone stood. "Please be seated." Eleanor sat quietly. The judge looked through the papers in front of him. Then he looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Hayes, do you understand why you are here today?" Eleanor swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." Her voice was soft. "Then tell me in your own words." Eleanor looked across the courtroom. Claire was watching her. Daniel was still looking down. "They say I cannot manage my own money," Eleanor said, "and your property. They want control of that too." The judge nodded. Claire's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is not about taking advantage of Mrs. Hayes." Eleanor almost laughed. Almost. The lawyer continued. "Her daughter is trying to protect her." Eleanor looked at Claire. Protect her. That word hurt more than anything. Claire had once been the person Eleanor trusted most in the world. She was the child Eleanor had held when she was sick, the child she had stayed awake for when she had nightmares, the child she had paid college tuition for when money was tight, the child she had helped buy her first home. And now that same daughter was telling a judge that Eleanor could no longer take care of herself. The lawyer placed several documents on the table. These records show unusual financial decisions made by Mrs. Hayes. Eleanor stared at the papers. "I didn't make those decisions." The lawyer looked at her. "Mrs. Hayes, are you saying these documents are false?" "I'm saying I never approved those transfers." Claire suddenly laughed again, this time louder. Eleanor turned toward her. Claire covered her mouth. "I'm sorry," Claire said, but she did not sound sorry. "You really don't remember, Mom?" The courtroom became silent. Eleanor felt something break inside her. "I remember everything." Claire shook her head. "You always say that." Daniel finally looked up. His eyes met Eleanor's. There was fear in them. Just for a second. Then he looked away. Eleanor noticed. She noticed everything. The judge did too. "Mr. Hayes," the judge said. Daniel straightened. "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you familiar with these transactions?" "Yes." "And you helped Mrs. Hayes manage some of her accounts?" "Only when she needed help." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her folder. That was not what happened. Daniel had started helping her months earlier. At first, it seemed harmless. He showed her how to pay bills online. He helped organize her bank statements. He told her she was worrying too much. Then things began changing. Her bank statements stopped coming by mail. Daniel said everything was digital now. Some bills were paid without her knowledge. When Eleanor asked questions, Claire became annoyed. "Mom, Daniel knows what he's doing." Eleanor had believed her. That was her mistake. She looked down at the folder in her hands. Inside were copies of old bank statements. She had found them 3 nights earlier. She had not told Claire. She had not told Daniel. And she had not told her lawyer everything. Not yet. The judge turned another page. "Mrs. Hayes, there is something else I need to ask you." Eleanor looked up. "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you authorize the transfer of $85,000 to a company called Hayes Property Solutions?" Eleanor froze. "No." Claire's face changed, only slightly, but Eleanor saw it. Daniel became completely still. The judge looked at him. "Mr. Hayes." Daniel cleared his throat. "I believe that was a payment related to property maintenance." "Property maintenance, yes." Eleanor shook her head. "There was no property work." Daniel looked at her. "You may not remember. I remember." Her voice was stronger now. "I remember because I asked you what that payment was." Daniel said nothing. "And you told me it was a mistake." Still nothing. The judge looked at the lawyer. "Do you have supporting documents for this payment?" The lawyer hesitated. "We have bank records." I asked for supporting documents. The lawyer looked through his folder. We can provide them later. The judge's eyes narrowed. Later, nobody spoke. Eleanor felt her heart beating faster. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The judge turned toward Claire. Mrs. Hayes, did you know about this company? Claire looked uncomfortable. I don't handle my mother's finances. That wasn't my question. Claire swallowed. I may have heard the name. Eleanor stared at her daughter. May have heard the name. Claire had once told Eleanor that Daniel had created a small company to help manage family property. Eleanor had never thought much about it. She should have. The judge looked back at the documents. Then he reached for another paper. Mr. Hayes, before we continue, I need an explanation. Daniel's face had gone pale. The judge lifted the document. This company was registered 6 months before the first transfer from Mrs. Hayes's account. Daniel said nothing. And according to this record, the judge stopped. He looked directly at Daniel. You are the only listed owner. Eleanor felt the room disappear around her. Claire turned toward Daniel. What? Daniel finally looked at his wife. Claire, I can explain. You said it was Mom's company. I said I was helping with it. You told me she owned it. I didn't say that. Claire's voice rose. The judge struck his gavel. Enough. Silence returned. Eleanor watched them argue. For the first time, she understood something. They were not prepared for this question. They had expected her to walk into court frightened and confused. They expected her to defend herself. They expected the judge to see an old woman who could not remember her own finances. But Eleanor had spent the last 3 nights reading every document she could find. She had discovered things that even Claire and Daniel did not know she had found. She reached into her folder. Her fingers touched another document. She had almost forgotten it was there. It was an old bank statement. And behind it was a handwritten note from her late husband. Eleanor had found the note in a locked box that had been sitting untouched for more than 10 years. She had not understood its meaning when she first read it, but now she did. Her husband had written only one sentence. If Daniel ever asks about the property papers, do not trust him. Eleanor slowly looked toward Daniel. He was staring at her. And this time, he was not pretending to be calm. The judge noticed. So, the judge said quietly, there is more to this case than the petition before me. Claire turned toward her mother. Her face was no longer amused. Mom. Eleanor said nothing. She simply closed the folder. The judge leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Hayes, I suggest you do not leave this courtroom after today's hearing. Eleanor looked at him. Why? The judge glanced at Daniel. Then at the documents. Because I believe we are about to discover why your daughter and son-in-law were so eager to convince this court that you were incapable of managing your own affairs. Eleanor's heart stopped for a moment. She had come to court expecting to defend her home. She had no idea she was about to uncover the reason they wanted it so badly. And somewhere inside that brown folder was the evidence that could destroy everything they had planned. The judge's words stayed in Eleanor's mind. They wanted her house, but why? Eleanor looked down at the brown folder. For years, that house had been more than walls and windows. It was where she had raised Claire, where her husband had planted the old apple tree in the backyard, where Eleanor had spent the last 20 years of her life after becoming a widow. Daniel knew how much that house meant to her. That was why his plan hurt so deeply. The judge looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Hayes, I want your attorney to review these documents before we continue. Eleanor nodded. Her lawyer, Margaret Lewis, moved closer. Margaret was a calm woman in her early 60s. She had known Eleanor's family for years. She took the folder. The moment she saw the handwritten note, her expression changed. Where did you find this? In my husband's old storage box. Who knew that box existed? Eleanor thought for a moment. Only me. Margaret looked at Daniel. Then back at Eleanor. Are you sure? Yes. Margaret lowered her voice. Then don't tell them anything else about it. Eleanor nodded. Across the courtroom, Claire was whispering angrily to Daniel. What did Mom mean? Daniel shook his head. I don't know. You told me everything was legal. It is. Then why are you scared? I'm not scared. But his hands were shaking. The judge called for a short recess. Everyone stood. Claire walked toward Eleanor. For a moment, Eleanor thought her daughter might apologize. Instead, Claire stopped in front of her. You should have told me about that note. Eleanor stared at her. You knew about it. Claire's face tightened. No. Then why did you ask? Claire had no answer. Daniel quickly stepped between them. Claire, let's go. Eleanor watched them leave. Something had changed. Claire was no longer laughing. She looked worried. That should have made Eleanor feel better. It didn't. It only made her more afraid. Because fear meant there was something worth hiding. Later that evening, Eleanor returned home alone. She unlocked the front door. The house felt different. To quiet. She turned on the hallway light. Everything looked normal. The old clock was ticking. The family pictures were still on the wall. Her husband's favorite chair was still beside the window. Eleanor walked into the kitchen. Then she stopped. One of the drawers was open. She knew she had closed it that morning. She checked the room carefully. Nothing seemed missing. Then she went upstairs. The storage room door was slightly open. Her heart began beating faster. She had locked that door before leaving for court. Eleanor pushed it open. The old wooden box was still there, but its lid was open. Someone had searched through it. Papers were scattered across the floor. Eleanor rushed toward the box. The handwritten note was gone. She froze. Someone had entered her home. Someone knew about the note, and that person had come looking for it. Eleanor called Margaret. Margaret answered immediately. Are you safe? Someone searched the storage room. Did they take anything? The note. There was silence. Then Margaret said quietly, then they know. Know what? That the documents can hurt them. Eleanor looked around the room. What documents? The ones your husband left. Eleanor's voice became weak. I thought the note was the only thing. No. Margaret paused. There may be more. Eleanor looked at the box. She suddenly remembered something. Her husband had always been careful. He never kept important papers in one place. Before his death, he had told her something strange. She had forgotten it until that moment. He had said, if anyone ever tries to take this house from you, look where we first planned to build the garden. Eleanor had never understood what he meant. Until now. The garden, she whispered. What? Margaret, I need to go. Don't do anything alone. But Eleanor had already hung up. Behind the house was a small garden. It had not been used in years. Eleanor walked outside with a flashlight. The night air was cold. She stood near the old stone bench. This was where she and her husband had once planned to build a flower garden. She looked at the ground. Nothing. Then she noticed one loose stone. Eleanor knelt. She moved it. Underneath was a small metal box. Her hands began shaking. She pulled it out. The box was old. Rust covered the edges, but the lock was still intact. Eleanor carried it inside. She opened it with a key she found taped beneath the box. Inside were several papers, a property deed. Bank records, a life insurance document. And a small black notebook. Eleanor opened the notebook. The first page contained her husband's handwriting. If this is being read, then someone has already tried to take what does not belong to them. Eleanor stopped breathing for a moment. She turned the page. There were names. Dates. Account numbers. And notes about Daniel. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Her husband had been watching Daniel long before Eleanor knew there was a problem. But why? She kept reading. One sentence made her blood run cold. Claire does not know everything. Eleanor closed the notebook. That sentence hurt. Maybe Claire had not planned everything. Maybe Daniel had been using her daughter. But Eleanor could not excuse Claire. Claire had still signed the papers. She had still gone to court. She had still laughed while her mother was being called incapable. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Then she found another document. It was an old agreement between her husband and a private bank. The agreement protected the family property from being sold without Eleanor's approval. But there was something else. A second page had been added years later. Eleanor read it twice. Her husband's signature was at the bottom, but the date was impossible. It was dated 3 months after his death. Someone had forged his signature, and the person who had filed that document was Daniel. Eleanor immediately called Margaret. I found something. What? My husband left records. What kind? Records about Daniel. Margaret became silent. Then she asked, does it mention the property? Yes. Does it prove the transfer was illegal? I don't know. Bring everything to me tomorrow. Eleanor looked at the documents. I will. Do not tell Claire. Eleanor hesitated. Margaret. Yes. I think Claire knows more than she's saying. Margaret sighed. I think so too. The next morning, Eleanor went to Margaret's office. They spent hours reviewing the papers. The evidence was stronger than they expected. There were records showing that Daniel had tried to move Eleanor's property into a company. There were bank transfers. There were copies of emails. And there was one document that connected Claire directly to the scheme. Eleanor stared at it. No. Margaret looked at her. I'm sorry. She wouldn't do this. Look at the signature. Eleanor did. It was Claire's. A legal document giving Daniel permission to manage certain family assets. The date was 6 months before the lawsuit. Eleanor felt tears running down her face. She signed it, yes. Maybe she didn't understand it. Maybe. Eleanor looked away. For a long time, she said nothing. Then Margaret found something else. A bank transfer. $25,000. It had gone from the company account to Claire. Eleanor's voice broke. She took the money. Margaret nodded. Yes. Eleanor covered her face. She had spent years protecting Claire. She had defended her when relatives called her selfish. She had paid her bills. She had helped her through every crisis. And now Claire had accepted money that came from her own mother. Eleanor felt anger rising through the sadness. But before she could speak, Margaret's phone rang. Margaret answered. Her face slowly changed. Who is this? She listened. Then she stood. How did you get my number? Silence. Yes, I understand. She ended the call. Eleanor looked at her. Who was it? Margaret did not answer immediately. Finally, she said, someone who knows about the documents, Daniel. No. Margaret looked directly at Eleanor. It was Claire. Eleanor's heart sank. What did she say? Margaret hesitated. She said Daniel is lying to everyone. Eleanor stared at her. And then? Margaret's voice became quieter. She said she has something that could prove it. Eleanor stood. What? Margaret looked toward the closed office door. She wouldn't tell me over the phone. Why? Because she said Daniel is listening to her calls. Eleanor felt a chill. Then Margaret added one final sentence. Claire wants to meet you tonight. Eleanor's eyes filled with fear. Where? Margaret handed her a piece of paper. Eleanor looked at the address. It was an old restaurant on the edge of town. A place Claire had not visited in years. At the bottom of the page, Claire had written a warning. Come alone, and don't trust Daniel. Eleanor stared at those words. For the first time since the lawsuit began, she wondered if her daughter was finally trying to save her. Or if this was another trap. And Eleanor had no idea that by agreeing to meet Claire that night, she was walking straight toward the secret that could change everything. Eleanor stared at the address in her hand. She had not seen that restaurant in years. It was where Claire had celebrated her 21st birthday. Back then, Eleanor had watched her daughter blow out 21 candles. Claire had hugged her afterward. Mom, you'll always be my best friend. Those words came back now. They felt like they belonged to another life. Margaret watched Eleanor carefully. You don't have to go. Eleanor folded the paper. I do. Why? Because if Claire really has something, I need to know. Margaret shook her head. Then take someone with you. Claire specifically said to come alone. That is exactly why I'm worried. Eleanor understood. Still, she had already made her decision. She would go, but she would not go blindly. That evening, Eleanor arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early. She parked across the street. For several minutes, she remained inside her car. People came and went through the restaurant doors. None of them looked familiar. Then she saw Claire. Her daughter stepped out of a dark car. She looked nervous. She kept looking behind her. Eleanor got out. Claire saw her. Mom. Her voice was barely a whisper. Eleanor walked toward her. You said you had something. I do. What is it? Not here. Claire looked around. Let's go inside. They chose a small table in the back. Claire kept her coat on. She looked exhausted. Eleanor had never seen her daughter look like that. What happened to you? Eleanor asked. Claire looked down. I haven't been sleeping. Because of Daniel. Claire nodded. Eleanor waited. Finally, Claire said, Daniel lied to me. I know. No. Mom. Claire looked up. You don't know how much. Eleanor's heart tightened. Claire reached into her purse. She pulled out a small flash drive. This has everything. Eleanor stared at it. What is it? Copies of Daniel's emails. How did you get them? I found them on his laptop. Claire's hands were shaking. He has been planning this for almost a year. Eleanor said nothing. Claire continued. He didn't just want the house. What else? Everything. Claire's eyes filled with tears. He wanted your savings. Your investments. Your insurance money. Even the money your father left you. Eleanor felt sick. And you. Claire looked away. He promised me a share. Silence. There was no excuse for that. Claire knew it. I was stupid, she whispered. You were greedy. Claire looked at her. Mother. Eleanor's voice remained calm. But you are also my daughter. Claire began crying. I'm sorry. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. She wanted to hug her. A part of her still wanted to, but she did not move. Why did you go to court against me? Claire wiped her eyes. Because Daniel told me you were going to cut me out of your will. Eleanor stared at her. I never said that. I know that now. Why didn't you ask me? Claire lowered her head. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of losing everything. Eleanor almost smiled. That's what Daniel wanted you to fear. Claire nodded. Then she leaned closer. But there is something else. Eleanor waited. Claire's voice dropped. Daniel knew about your husband's records. Eleanor froze. How? I don't know. Think. Claire swallowed. He asked me about the storage room. Eleanor remembered the broken lock. He knew where the box was. Yes. Did he know about the garden? Claire shook her head. I don't think so. Eleanor looked at the flash drive. What is on this? Proof that Daniel knew the documents were fake. Claire pulled out her phone. She opened a recording. A man's voice filled the space between them. Daniel. His voice was clear. Once the court gives us control, she won't be able to stop anything. Eleanor's face became pale. Claire stopped the recording. There are more. How many? 23. Eleanor looked at her daughter. Why didn't you give these to the judge? Claire hesitated. Because Daniel knows. Knows what? He knows I copied them. Eleanor felt a chill. Where is the laptop? At home. Then why isn't he looking for you? Claire looked toward the restaurant entrance. Because he thinks I still support him. A strange silence followed. Then Eleanor noticed something. A man was standing outside. He was looking through the glass. Claire saw him. Her face changed. Mom. Eleanor turned. Don't look. Who is that? I don't know. Claire quickly stood. We have to leave. They moved toward the back door. The man outside entered the restaurant. Eleanor and Claire hurried into the kitchen. A waiter shouted after them. Claire pushed open the back door. They stepped into the alley. Where's your car? Eleanor asked. Across the street. They started walking quickly. Then Claire grabbed Eleanor's arm. Wait. What? Claire looked toward the street. Daniel's car was parked near Eleanor's. Eleanor's stomach dropped. He followed you. Claire nodded. He knows we're together. They moved back into the alley. For the first time, Eleanor saw real fear in Claire's eyes. Not guilt. Not shame. Fear. Where can we go? Eleanor asked. My apartment. No. Claire looked at her. He'll look there first. Eleanor thought quickly. Margaret, your lawyer. Yes. Claire shook her head. If Daniel is watching me, he may be watching her too. Eleanor felt trapped. Then she remembered something. The old church near the river. Her husband had served on its charity board for years. The pastor still knew Eleanor. They could hide there. They walked several blocks before reaching the church. The building was dark, but the side door was unlocked. Eleanor called the pastor. He answered after a few rings. He allowed them inside. Claire sat on a wooden bench. Her hands were trembling. Eleanor sat beside her for several minutes. Neither spoke. Finally, Claire whispered, Mom, I know you may never forgive me. Eleanor looked at her. I don't know what I'll do. Claire nodded. But I need to tell you one more thing. Eleanor waited. Daniel didn't create this plan alone. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Who helped him? I don't know. You must know something. Claire shook her head. I heard him talking to someone. Who? I couldn't hear the name. What did he say? Claire closed her eyes. He said the person had been waiting years for your family to lose the property. Eleanor felt a cold wave move through her. Years. Claire nodded. Double quotes. He said your father made a mistake. Eleanor suddenly became still. Her father had been dead for more than 30 years. What mistake? I don't know. Claire reached into her purse again. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. I found this in Daniel's desk. Eleanor opened it. There was an address and a name. The name belonged to a man Eleanor had not heard since she was a young woman. Her father's former business partner. Eleanor's hands began shaking. He's dead, she whispered. Claire looked at her. That's what I thought. Eleanor turned the paper over. There was another line. Meet him before the hearing. He has the original agreement. Eleanor stared at the words. Her father had left behind a family property dispute that Eleanor had never known about, and Daniel had somehow found it. But then Claire spoke. Again, Mom. Double quotes Eleanor. Looked up. Claire's face had gone completely white. There is something else on the flash drive. What? Claire swallowed. It isn't just Daniel's plan. She looked toward the dark church doors. There is a recording of him talking about Dad. Eleanor's heart stopped. My husband. Claire nodded. Double quotes Daniel said he knows what really happened before Dad died. The church suddenly felt colder. Eleanor looked at the flash drive in Claire's hand. For years, she had believed her husband's death was a terrible loss. Now, for the first time, she wondered if it had also been a secret. And if Daniel knew that secret. Then the fight over her house was only the beginning. Eleanor could not move. Her husband's death had been painful enough. She had spent years accepting it. Now Claire was telling her that Daniel knew something about those final days, something Eleanor had never known. What did Daniel say about your father? Eleanor asked. Claire looked down at the flash drive. I only heard part of the recording. Play it. Claire hesitated. Mom, you need to be ready. For what? I don't know. Eleanor looked directly at her. Play it. Claire connected the flash drive to her phone. The recording began. Daniel's voice came through. She still doesn't know what happened. Another man's voice answered. Then keep it that way. Eleanor's heart began pounding. She knew the second voice. She could not remember where from. Daniel continued. The property is almost ours. Not yet. She has the old papers. Then find them. Daniel sighed. And if she finds out about her husband? There was silence. Then the other man spoke. She won't. The recording ended. Eleanor stared at the phone. Who was that? Claire shook her head. I don't know. Eleanor replayed the final seconds. Again and again. Then she suddenly recognized the voice. Her face went pale. Margaret. Claire looked confused. What? That voice. Eleanor stood. I know that voice. Who is it? Eleanor did not answer immediately. She remembered a man who had attended her husband's funeral. A quiet man who had stood near the back. A man her husband had once trusted. A man Eleanor had not seen in more than 20 years. His name was Robert Mason. He had been her husband's business partner. And according to the records, Robert had died 15 years earlier. Or at least that was what Eleanor believed. Claire looked at the address again. That's his old office. Eleanor nodded. Then we go there. Claire grabbed her arm. Mom, you heard the recording. Exactly. Daniel may know we're looking for him. Then we need to move faster. The next morning, Eleanor and Claire met Margaret at her office. Eleanor placed the flash drive on the desk. Margaret listened to the recording twice. When it ended, she remained silent. You know the voice, Eleanor said. Margaret looked at her. I think I do, Robert Mason. Margaret nodded slowly. Yes. He's alive. Margaret's face became serious. If he is, this changes everything. Eleanor placed the old documents on the desk. Then we find him. Margaret looked through them. There is something else. She pointed to the property agreement. This document was never supposed to be filed. Why? Because your husband canceled it before his death. Eleanor frowned. Then why does Daniel have a copy? That's what we need to find out. Margaret reached for the phone. I know someone who can trace the company. Within an hour, they had a new lead. Hayes Property Solutions had received money from several different accounts. Not only Eleanor's, there were 3 other elderly property owners connected to the same company. Eleanor stared at the names. They did this to other people. Margaret nodded. It looks like it. Eleanor felt something change inside her. Until that moment, she had been fighting for herself. Now she understood that Daniel's plan was bigger. He had not simply betrayed his mother in law. He had built a system that could hurt other families. We need to stop him, Eleanor said. Margaret looked at her. We will. No. Eleanor's voice was calm. We need to let him think he's winning. Claire looked at her mother. What are you planning? Eleanor closed the folder. Nothing illegal. She looked at Margaret. We give the court the truth. Then she looked at Claire. But we don't show Daniel everything. Margaret understood immediately. If he thinks he still has a chance, he may make another mistake. Exactly. That afternoon, Eleanor returned home. She acted as if nothing had happened. She watered the plants. She made tea. She even called Claire and spoke normally. Daniel called her that evening. His voice sounded friendly. Mrs. Hayes, we should talk. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table. About what? The court case. What about it? I don't want this to become ugly. Eleanor almost smiled. You already made it ugly. Daniel sighed. You are misunderstanding everything. Then explain it. There was a long pause. I think you should settle. Settle. Give Claire the house. Eleanor looked toward the window. And what do I get? You'll have enough money to live comfortably. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the phone. So you have already decided what happens to my home. No one is taking your home. Then why are you asking me to give it away? Daniel became quiet. Eleanor heard something in the background. A door closing. Then another voice. Claire's voice. Daniel. He quickly ended the call. Eleanor stared at the phone. He had not been alone. Someone had been with him. Someone who was helping him. The next morning, Margaret called. We have a problem. What happened? Someone accessed your bank records last night. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Daniel. We don't know. Can they still move money? Not without your approval. Eleanor breathed out. But there is something else. What? Someone tried to access your husband's old insurance file. Eleanor froze. Why? I don't know. Who has access? Margaret paused. That is the strange part. Tell me, the request came from a law office. Which one? Margaret gave her the name. Eleanor knew it. It was the law firm representing Claire and Daniel. Eleanor sat down. They were searching for something connected to her husband. Something they were afraid she might find. That evening, Eleanor opened the old black notebook again. She read every page. Most of it was about business. But near the back, she found several short entries. One caught her attention. Robert knows about the agreement. Another said, Daniel asked too many questions today. Then another, if anything happens to me, Eleanor must never sign anything connected to Mason. Eleanor stopped. Her husband had been afraid. She had never known. Then she found the final entry. It was written only 2 weeks before his death. I made a mistake trusting someone close to me. There was no name. No explanation. Nothing else. Eleanor closed the notebook. For years, she had blamed herself for not seeing the warning signs. Now she realized something. Her husband had seen them too. He had simply not lived long enough to explain them. The following day, Eleanor received an unexpected package. There was no return address. Inside was an old photograph. Eleanor stared at it. It showed her husband standing outside his office. Beside him were 3 men. One was Robert Mason. One was Daniel. Eleanor's hands went cold. Daniel was much younger. But he was clearly there. She turned the photograph over. A date was written on the back. It was from 6 months before Eleanor's husband died. That alone was strange. But beneath the date was a handwritten sentence. Ask Daniel why he was there that night. Eleanor stared at the words. Then her phone rang. It was Claire. Mom, where are you? At home. Don't open the front door. Eleanor looked toward the hallway. Why? Because Daniel is coming. Eleanor's heart began pounding. How do you know? Claire's voice shook. Because I saw him leave with something. What? I don't know. Then Claire whispered, but I think he's going to your house to find the last document. Eleanor looked at the photograph, the last document. Claire took a breath. The one that proves who really owns the property. Eleanor stood. Claire, where are you? I don't know. What do you mean? I ran. Eleanor heard fear in her daughter's voice. Then Claire said something that made Eleanor's blood run cold. Mom, Daniel found out that I copied the recordings. The call suddenly ended. Eleanor stood alone in the kitchen. A car stopped outside. She looked through the window. Daniel stepped out. He walked toward the front door. But he was not carrying a briefcase. He was carrying a small metal box. The same kind of box Eleanor had found beneath the garden. Her heart stopped. Daniel had found another one. And whatever was inside it was important enough for him to risk everything. Eleanor quietly stepped away from the window. She picked up the phone and called Margaret. Then she looked at the locked front door. 3 slow knocks echoed through the house. Daniel's voice came from outside. Mrs. Hayes. Eleanor said nothing. I know you're inside. Another knock. Then his voice became colder. Give me the documents, Eleanor. She froze. He knew. But there was one thing Daniel did not know. Eleanor had already made copies, and those copies were now in the hands of someone Daniel could not control. The judge. Eleanor stood completely still. Daniel was outside. He knew she was inside. And somehow, he knew about the documents, but he did not know everything. That was Eleanor's only advantage. She looked at the phone in her hand. Margaret was still connected. Don't open the door. Margaret whispered. I won't. Police are on the way. Eleanor moved away from the entrance. Daniel knocked again. Eleanor, we can handle this like family. She almost Laugh. Family. That word had become meaningless. Daniel continued, I know you have the papers. Eleanor said nothing. You don't understand what they mean. Still nothing. I can protect you. Eleanor finally answered. You had your chance. Silence. Then Daniel's voice changed. You should be careful. Eleanor felt a cold fear in her chest. Is that a threat? No. A pause. I'm trying to save you from making a mistake. Eleanor looked at the front door. Leaving you out of my affairs was never a mistake. Daniel said nothing. A few seconds later, she heard his footsteps move. Away. Eleanor waited. She looked through the window. Daniel walked toward his car. But he did not leave. He stood beside it. He took out his phone. He made a call. Eleanor watched him for several seconds. Then, she noticed another car parked across the street. Claire was inside. She had been watching Daniel. Eleanor quickly called her. Claire. Mom. Where are you? In the car. Did Daniel see you? No. Stay there. But, stay there. Eleanor ended the call. 20 minutes later, Margaret arrived. She entered through the back door. Eleanor showed her the metal box Daniel had been carrying. He brought this here. Margaret examined it. Did he leave it? No. Then we need to know why. Eleanor looked toward the street. Claire is outside. Margaret nodded. Bring her in. A few minutes later, Claire entered the house. She looked exhausted. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were red. Eleanor looked at her daughter. What happened? Claire sat down. Daniel found out about the recordings. How? I don't know. Did you tell anyone? No. Claire looked at Margaret. Except her. Margaret nodded. Claire continued. Daniel said I had betrayed him. You did. Claire looked at Eleanor. I know. Her voice broke. I know I hurt you. Eleanor did not answer. Claire wiped her eyes. But I didn't know how far he had gone. What do you mean? Claire reached into her coat. She pulled out another envelope. I found this in Daniel's car. Eleanor opened it. Inside was a copy of an old property agreement. Margaret took it. She read it carefully. Then she looked at Eleanor. This is the original agreement. Eleanor frowned. But the original is supposed to be with the bank. It was. Margaret pointed to the signature. Until someone replaced it. Eleanor felt confused. What does it mean? Margaret explained. Your husband placed the property under a legal protection plan. Yes. But this copy contains an additional clause. What clause? Margaret looked at Claire. Then back at Eleanor. It says the property cannot be transferred if the owner is being pressured or deceived. Eleanor stared at the page. So Daniel couldn't legally take it. Not without proving you freely agreed. Claire whispered. That's why he wanted the court to declare you incapable. Eleanor finally understood. The lawsuit was not really about protecting her. It was about removing her legal power. If the court declared her incapable, Daniel could control the property. Her stomach turned. Margaret nodded. Exactly. Claire lowered her head. And I helped him. Eleanor looked at her. Yes. Claire began crying. I thought I was protecting my future. You were protecting greed. No. Eleanor turned away. She could forgive mistakes. But this was not one mistake. It was a chain of choices. Margaret placed the agreement on the table. There is still one problem. What? The person who witnessed this agreement. Eleanor looked at her. Who? Margaret pointed to the signature. Robert Mason. Eleanor froze. Robert. Yes. But he's dead. That is what we thought. Margaret picked up her phone. I checked. She looked at Eleanor. Robert Mason is alive. Claire's eyes widened. Where? Arizona. Eleanor stared at the document. So Daniel has been working with him. We don't know yet, but they know each other. Margaret nodded. Definitely. Then, Margaret noticed something else. She turned the paper over. There was a handwritten number. A phone number. She dialed it. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Then a text arrived. Stop looking. Margaret's face became serious. Eleanor. Read the message. Claire whispered. They know we're investigating. Margaret nodded. Yes. The next morning, the three women met at the courthouse. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Eleanor carried a small folder. Margaret carried a much larger one. Claire walked beside them. She looked terrified. Across the hallway, Daniel stood with his lawyer. He looked confident. Again, he smiled when he saw Eleanor. Then, He looked at Claire. His smile disappeared. The judge entered. Everyone took their seats. The hearing began. Daniel's lawyer spoke. First, he claimed Eleanor was confused. He said she was being manipulated by people around her. He called the new evidence unreliable. Eleanor listened quietly. Then the judge looked at her. Mrs. Hayes, do you have anything to add? Margaret stood. Double quotes. Yes, Your Honor. She placed the documents on the table. These records show unauthorized transfers from Mrs. Hayes's accounts. Daniel's lawyer objected. Your Honor, these are incomplete, Margaret calmly answered. We have the complete records. She placed another folder down. The court can compare them. The judge began reading. Daniel's face changed. Then, Margaret submitted the recordings. The courtroom listened too. Daniel's own voice. Once the court gives us control, she won't be able to stop anything. Silence. Daniel's lawyer looked at him. What did you say? Daniel shook his head. It's edited. Margaret immediately submitted the full recordings. The judge listened. Daniel became pale. Then Claire stood. I have something to say. Daniel looked at her. Claire, don't. She turned toward the judge. My husband lied. Daniel stood. Claire. The judge struck his gavel. Sit down. Claire continued. He told me my mother was confused. She began crying. He told me the money was going to be used for the family. Daniel shouted. You're lying. The judge looked at him. Mr. Hayes, one more interruption and I will hold you in contempt. Daniel. Claire continued. He told me my mother would lose the house anyway. Eleanor looked at her daughter. Claire looked back. I believed him. Her voice broke. I'm sorry, Mom. Eleanor looked down. The judge asked. Mrs. Hayes, did you authorize these transfers? No. Did you sign the property documents? No. Did you give your daughter permission to act on your behalf? Eleanor hesitated. I trusted her. The judge nodded. That is not the same as giving legal authority. Daniel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, there is still no proof that my client forged anything. Margaret smiled slightly. Actually, there is. She placed another document before the judge. The handwriting expert's report. The judge read it. Then he looked at Daniel. Double quotes Mr. Hayes. Daniel swallowed. Yes, Your Honor. Would you like to explain why the signature on this document was created after Mrs. Hayes's husband died? Daniel said nothing. The courtroom became silent. Eleanor looked at him. He was trapped. But then Daniel slowly smiled. It was a strange smile, a confident one. He looked toward Eleanor. You think this proves everything? Margaret frowned. Daniel leaned back. It doesn't. The judge asked, why not? Daniel looked at the judge. Because the person who can explain all of this is not in this courtroom. Eleanor's heart sank. Who? Daniel looked directly at her. Robert Mason. Margaret stood still. Daniel continued. And if you want the truth about your husband's death. He paused. You should ask him why your husband was going to expose him. Eleanor felt the room spinning. The judge ordered everyone to remain seated. Then he turned to his clerk. Find out whether Robert Mason is alive. The clerk nodded. But before he could leave, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone turned. A gray-haired man walked slowly inside. Eleanor recognized him immediately. Her breath caught. It was Robert Mason, the man everyone believed had been dead for 15 years. He looked directly at Eleanor. Then he said quietly, your husband wasn't killed by an accident. Eleanor could not breathe. Robert took one more step. He was about to tell you the truth. And then he looked at Daniel. But Daniel already knows what happened. The courtroom went completely silent. Eleanor stared at Robert Mason. For years, she had believed he was dead. Now he was standing only a few feet away. Alive. Older. Tired. But alive. Daniel looked like he had seen a ghost. Robert, he whispered. Robert turned toward him. Yes, Daniel. Daniel stood. What are you doing here? Robert gave him a cold look. Finishing what your father should have finished years ago. Daniel's face lost all color. The judge raised his hand. Everyone will remain calm. Robert walked toward the witness area. I came here because Mrs. Hayes deserves the truth. Eleanor could barely speak. What happened to my husband? Robert looked at her. I was there the night he died. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. You told everyone you had left town. I lied. Why? Because I was afraid. Afraid of Daniel. Robert nodded. Not at first. He looked at Daniel. I was afraid of what your husband had discovered. The judge asked him to explain. Robert took a breath. Years ago, your husband and I bought several properties together. One of them was this family property. Eleanor listened. Your husband later discovered that someone had been changing financial records. Who? Robert looked at Daniel. Daniel. Daniel immediately shook his head. That's impossible. Robert continued. Daniel was young then. He worked around the business. He learned how the records were kept. Eleanor felt another wave of pain. Her husband had trusted Daniel. Robert explained that Daniel had started taking small amounts of money. At first, no one noticed. Then the amounts became larger. Eleanor's husband discovered the missing money. He confronted Daniel. Daniel promised to return it. But the money never came back. Instead, Daniel created a plan. He wanted control of the property, and Robert had helped him. Eleanor stared at Robert. You helped him. Robert lowered his head. Yes. The courtroom became silent again. I was in debt, Robert said. Daniel knew it. He used that weakness. So both of you betrayed my husband. Yes. Eleanor's voice broke. Then what happened that night? Robert looked down. Your husband confronted us. Daniel suddenly stood. That's enough. The judge struck his gavel. Sit down. Robert continued. Your husband had proof. He said he would report everything. Eleanor wiped a tear from her cheek. Then why did he die? Robert closed his eyes. He had a heart condition. Eleanor stared at him. That doesn't explain it. No. Robert looked at her. Daniel did not kill him. Eleanor froze. Daniel looked relieved. But Robert continued. Daniel caused the situation that led to his death. Daniel's relief disappeared. What does that mean? Robert explained that during the argument, Daniel had threatened Eleanor's husband. He had told him that if he went to the police, Eleanor would lose everything. Her husband became extremely distressed. He collapsed. Robert called for help, but Daniel stopped him. He told me not to call anyone. Eleanor covered her mouth. Why? Because he wanted time to find the documents. Robert's voice shook. Your husband was still alive. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. He could have been saved, Robert nodded. But Daniel wanted the papers first. Daniel shouted. That's a lie. Robert looked at him. You know it's true. The judge asked, is there evidence to support this claim? Robert reached into his coat. He placed an old envelope on the table. I kept this for 20 years. Inside were copies of emails, business records, and an old emergency call log. The judge reviewed them carefully. One record showed the emergency call had been delayed. Another showed Daniel had accessed the property documents that same night. The courtroom became painfully quiet. Eleanor looked at her daughter. Claire was crying. She finally understood how deep the betrayal went. Daniel had not only tried to steal from Eleanor. He had hidden the truth about her father's death. He had built his entire plan on fear. The judge looked at Daniel. Mr. Hayes, you have the right to remain silent. Daniel said nothing. For the first time, he had no answer. The judge took a long time reviewing the evidence. Then he gave his decision. Eleanor would remain in full control of her property and finances. The petition against her was dismissed. The financial transfers were referred for investigation. The court also ordered that the suspicious property documents be preserved as evidence. Daniel's attorney asked for time. The judge refused. This court has seen enough evidence to understand that Mrs. Hayes was not the person who needed protection. He paused. She was the person who needed protection from those who claimed to be protecting her. Eleanor lowered her head. Tears ran down her face. Not because she had lost, because she had finally been believed. The woman her daughter had called confused had just stood in court and watched the truth defeat every lie. Daniel was escorted out. As he passed Eleanor, he stopped. He looked at her. Please. Eleanor said nothing. I made mistakes. She finally looked at him. No. Her voice was calm. You made choices. Daniel lowered his eyes. Then he walked away. Claire remained behind. She stood several feet from her mother. For a long time, she could not speak. Finally, she whispered, Mom. Eleanor looked at her. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good. Claire nodded. I deserve that. Eleanor looked at the floor. I loved you. I know. I trusted you. I know. You didn't just hurt me. Claire began crying. You made me doubt myself. Claire covered her face. I'm sorry. Eleanor wanted to reach for her, but she didn't. Some wounds needed time. Your husband made his choices, Eleanor said. But you made yours. Claire nodded. I did. Eleanor walked toward the courtroom doors. Then she stopped. Claire. Her daughter looked up. You can still become a better person. Claire cried harder. But you will have to do it without my money. Claire nodded. I understand. That was all Eleanor said. She walked away. Months later, Eleanor returned to her house. The same house Daniel had tried to take. The same kitchen. The same garden. The same old apple tree her husband had planted decades earlier. But everything felt different. The legal case had taken months to finish. The investigation had uncovered more victims. Daniel had used the same company to target several elderly property owners. Some had lost money. Some had almost lost their homes. Eleanor gave her evidence to investigators. She also used part of the recovered money to support a local group that helped older people protect themselves from financial abuse. Margaret helped her create new legal protections. No family member could ever again gain control of her finances simply because she trusted them. Eleanor changed her will too. She did not cut Claire out completely, but she placed strict conditions on everything. Claire would receive nothing simply because she was family. She would have to rebuild the relationship first. Not with money. With honesty. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor received a letter. The handwriting was familiar. Claire single quotes S. Eleanor opened it slowly. There were only a few pages. Claire wrote about Daniel, about the court. About how ashamed she felt. But she did not ask for money. She did not ask for the house. She did not ask Eleanor to save her. She asked only one question. Do you think you will ever forgive me? Eleanor read the sentence twice. Then she walked to the window. Outside, rain fell over the garden. She remembered her husband. She remembered the courtroom. She remembered Claire laughing. And she remembered the moment the judge finally spoke. Eleanor folded the letter. She placed it inside a drawer. She did not answer. Not yet. Because Eleanor had finally learned something important. Forgiveness was a gift. It was not a debt. And Claire would have to earn it. Eleanor stepped into the garden. She touched the old apple tree. For the first time in years, she felt peace. She had not won by destroying her enemies. She had won by refusing to let them destroy her. The house was still hers. Her life was still hers. And her voice was finally her own. But there was one final thing Eleanor never told Claire. The copies of the evidence she had given the judge were not the only copies she had made. There was one final folder, locked away in her husband's old safe. Inside it was the complete record of Daniel's plan, including one name that had never been mentioned in court. A name Eleanor had seen only once. A name connected to someone far more powerful than Daniel. Eleanor closed the safe. The battle with Daniel was over. But as she looked at the old photograph of her husband, she realized something that sent a quiet chill through her. Daniel had never been the beginning of the story. He had only been the first person Eleanor had caught. And somewhere, someone else was still waiting.